Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to discuss Trails of Cold Steel 4. I might, this is definitely going to be like a spoiler discussion, but I just wanted to talk about it. Obviously, it's November 18th at the time I'm recording, so I figured I might as well include that because who knows when this is actually going to go up, because it took like over a month for all the other Trails videos to like start coming out. That's just because I kept pushing stuff around, behind the scenes stuff that's not important. Because I also don't know how long, whether this is going to be multiple videos or like how this whole situation is going to turn out, like the previous ones or not. But I just wanted to kind of take time to discuss my thoughts about it, talk about plot points and stuff like that. Like I said, I'm going to go into spoilers, so if you've not played Trails of Cold Steel 4 all the way through, do not listen to this. I have played it, I just actually finished my first playthrough last night at the time of recording, so I'm probably going to start my second playthrough soon enough. To anyone that's curious, I don't know if I brought this up in the previous ones, but I've played 1, 2, and 3 times through, and I feel proud of myself because I platinumed all 3 of them. They're not hard platinums, only like probably annoying thing, because a lot of that you can just get through a natural playthrough, but obviously if you have guides, it helps you like with a lot of like the quest and a whole bunch of other stuff. Really important to go into. But first of all, I want to kind of start this off by my general thoughts. I really loved Cold Steel 4. I'd say 3 might be my favorite, and this is kind of up there, but I'm also one of those people that hates like ranking stuff, but it's like, I think 3 still might have the edge, but I really enjoyed this. What they did with the story, and just like, it's interesting too because they brought everything in. Now I'm also going to tell you that this is my first step into, like, the Trails of Cold Steel games are my first step into this world. For one, this is my first Legend of Heroes games, but also it's also my first in this world. By that I mean, because obviously there's the Trails in the Sky games, which take place in the stories with Liberl, and then there's the Trails 2, which are the Crossbell games, and I've never played any. I know bits and pieces because 3, well, not just 3, all of the games do a good job of explaining like some of the stuff that goes down, like obviously because Oliver was a part of everything that went down in Liberl, so you get a little bit of that from him while also picking it up from other like NPCs and stuff like that, so it comes up storyline wise. Same thing for the Crossbell stuff, because obviously the Crossbell stuff happens simultaneously with like Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, because literally during the events of 2, the Azure Tree pops up, and that's part of the second Crossbell game. So obviously a lot of that coincides. Literally the end of the second game, we're in spoiler territory at this point, like Rean and Altina run into Racia, because I always say her name like Rixia, I think it's Racia, her and Lloyd, so obviously there's that connection there. But in general, I thought I like that they combined everything that even though I don't have the attachment to these characters because I haven't played the other 5 games in the series, the 3 Trails in the Sky games and the 2 Crossbell games, but it's still neat to literally see all the warriors together. You see Team Liberl, you see Team Crossbell, and literally having them all together, like, on the Pantagruel in that moment. It's like, this is a monumentous moment of just like, this is such a major crossover. This is like some Avenger shit right now, and that's what's so dope about it. Like, having literally all these characters like, hey, I know about you, heard about you, yeah, because even in the beginning, there's that prologue where like, oh yeah, they talk about some of the stuff that's going down, and they also talk about like, oh yeah, have you heard about Rean? Yeah, I've heard some stuff about the Ashen Chevalier. Not some stuff doesn't paint him in the best light, but Lloyd is the one that's kind of like, yeah, he helped us out, so obviously Operation Birdcage in 3, so like he has a little bit of a better opinion. And I thought what really threw me for a loop when they were like, yeah, there's rumors that he's Gilead Osborne's son. I was like, Jesus, that's already out there? How the hell? Like, holy crap. Because obviously Rean in Class 7 only found that out at the end of 2, but I'm like, how the hell did that information get it? I guess it's not like I don't think your general person's going to know that. I think it's just because obviously they're looking into, because the whole point was like they were looking into information about trying to figure out what went down in Heimdall at the end of 3, and also figure out like what kind of effect that's happening on Zemeria, which is also, affecting Liberl. It's not just an Erebonian like Empire situation, it's affecting Liberl, obviously playing a role in Calvert, because like the Empire is declaring war on Calvert, and Crossbell, like everyone's getting affected. Obviously like Northumbria, I'm gonna butcher this place's name because I always butcher it, Remifera, like them. And so it was just kind of that whole situation. But not only just bringing in those characters, you got to see to me, I feel like this is the most lovey like video game, because there's always been relationships and love and stuff like that, but it's like this is where you get to see the conclusion of so many stories, so many like pairings off, because they introduce certain pairings. You're like, oh, is that a thing? Like a great example, Linde and Gaius. I don't think, like, obviously they were in art club together, like we've seen like them be in art club together since like Trails Code Steel 1, but this was the first one that really hinted, because like the only interaction they had, at least that we're aware of, is like during Gaius's bonding event, like because he only has like one in the entire game, aside from like the final one, but throughout the main game, he runs into Linde, because obviously he's with you, and you know, because he goes through the keep with Rean, and afterwards like they kick it and talk to Linde for a little bit, you know. So but that's the only interactions we've really had since like post almost everyone in class 7 graduating early, but we don't know like some of the, you know, them keeping in touch. I mean, to be fair, Gaius was unreachable for like 6 months, because like, you know, obviously him getting, you know, becoming a dominion amongst the Gralsritter, you know, like, you know, so that whole situation. So but like that, there's even stuff hinting like Elliot and Mick, like that might be a thing. Obviously like Bridget and Alan, we see the continuation of that story, so it's like stuff like that. I should also note the fact is we got to see some characters, like I was bringing up, I was like Margarita, and seeing her situation in this, we see her and Vincent's relationship, and he's struggling because when you meet him in was it Michelheim? I think it's Michelheim, and for whatever in my head I want to say Michelheim, but I think it's like Michelheim. He struggles with the fact is that like he's very shallow, because like when she's skinny and everything, he loves her. It's like, yeah, like he's kind of falling for her personality, but when she's bigger, he has a like, and that was an interesting thing too. Like she would constantly fluctuate weight the entire game, and it's like, how are you doing that? We have no idea. Anytime it comes up, they never really give you an answer. Once again, maybe there is some text. I make sure to try and talk to like every NPC and like every opportunity, because there's so much to go over, because they do little things in this game mechanically that I think are really interesting about how they handle certain things. Like you will always know when there's new dialogue, because like they'll expressly be like, oh, things have changed around Erebonia, so you get an opportunity to like, and they also like every time you check your list on where you can go when the world kind of opens up more, it always has a new beside it, so being like, oh, maybe there's some quests, some sub events, or just new dialogue with NPCs. So I think that was such a small little detail. I'm like, I appreciate you doing that, because this way you can always make sure like, oh, you can always keep up to date with like some of the people's thoughts about where the main plot is heading, because obviously like a lot of the main plot has, you know, effects on the entire country, obviously, because like you're constantly hearing like people's perspectives, because like I think it's such an interesting little thing where you have like certain NPCs that you met during 3, obviously you're meeting them again in this, but like some of those NPCs are no longer at where they were, because obviously they get drafted, because there's like a major draft across the story. But I think that was just kind of an interesting little thing. So like maybe at some points I might have missed some dialogue. I try to talk to every NPC when new dialogue presented, but maybe it's something I missed. But I'm fairly certain they never really expressly explain what Margarita's whole situation. But once again, seeing Margarita, seeing we got to see Bridget in this game. We see her pretty early on, like in the March in Heimdall. Like Alan looks and he sees her in the crowd. I was like, oh my god, it's Bridget. And Rex is there. I'm like, oh, because there's certain characters I'm kind of bummed you don't get to meet everyone, but you get to hear about certain people. Like you hear about Colette. And I actually think this is super dope. The store she was working at in 2, before she ends up joining up with the Courageous, she actually goes back, because it's the Artisan Street. She goes back to work on Artisan Street because they took care of her during, you know, the Civil War. So she actually owns a jewelry store there, which is, because if you remember anything about Colette, her whole thing was about money. But even when she joins the Courageous, what was her thing? Selling, like, you know, very, very expensive jewelry, but like, you know, accessories. So it's that. God, who else? I'm always going to mispronounce her name. I think it's Adel, you know, from the gardening club. You get to see her too. You get, like I brought him up earlier, you get to see Vincent. It's just like these moments where you're just like, you get giddy. It's just like 3 in that regard. You're like, oh my god, these are characters I didn't get to see last time. But I think it's kind of a bummer. I forgot who it was. I know Rex is one of the people, but when Rean's talking to him and like everything's kind of coming to an head later in the story, obviously you learn that everyone from the main branch, former Thors graduates that were, you know, are also helping out characters you don't get to see, like Clara, Loggins, Casper, Klein, and and Colette, like there's a point where Rean talks to him. It's only like quick dialogue, but he's like, hey, you guys, and you get little pictures popping up of obviously what they looked like the last time Rean had seen them, and that was like in 2. And well, actually, no, the last time we saw them was actually graduation. Obviously, we didn't get to see that, but still, I was like, it's stuff like that that I'm like, it gets me so giddy. It's something I don't know if I really brought this up during my 3 discussion, but I think it's so interesting how the Trails of Cold Steel series works in the sense that like 1 and 3 mirror each other, like storyline wise, and how they're structured the same way 2 and 4 do. In the sense that like 1 and 3 are very straightforward. You go to every area one time, and it's the whole thing of like, oh, there's field studies in 1 and 3, there are field exercises, and you know, obviously a lot of the relationships have been developed and stuff like that, while also having relationships. And like, you know, Kurt and Yuna's relationship, you can make an argument, is a reflection of a lot of relationships, but at its core, it's very, especially their first encounter where like she fell on top of him, it's very Rean and Elisa based. So obviously you see remnants of that, because even now Tina makes a joke about it. It's reflected in that same regard as well. So, but 2 and 4 are kind of like, obviously how 2 was a little more open worldish. 4 kind of reflects that as well. Once you get to like, in the same vein too, once you go to chapter 2, well, act 2, because that's another thing too. 1 and 3 are chapters, and 2 and 4 are acts, divided in acts. And so, but once you get to act 2, then you're able to kind of like, you know, do what you want to. You're able to go to different areas. And I think it's so interesting how they handle a lot of stuff too, because like in between 1 and 2, it's literally a month time skip. In between 3 and 4, it's 2 weeks. And I think that's so interesting how they handle that as well, because I feel like you get a little more like visual representation of what's going on between 3 and 4 than you did 1 and 2. Because obviously when you do the whole 2 situation, you wake up with Rean being like, wait, Celine telling him it's been a month. He's like, wait, what? You know, so especially because we're off the bummer of an ending that 3 had. Like obviously the whole Millium's gone. Obviously the curse is spread across the empire, and obviously war is raging because everyone's like, yeah. But I also thought that was an interesting thing too, that not the curse had spread, but it wasn't in full effect. Like some people would kind of submit to it. You see like characters kind of be all about the war, and it's like, oh, this person's under the curse, we can't really do too much about it. But over the course of the game, you do help some NPCs kind of fix their situation. A great one would be like the Alan thing. I thought that was so dope, like it being a side quest helping Alan, because Bridget, you know, that was such a dope moment. I had to be the nerd I am and screenshot it because I love it, because literally it's all of class 7 and it's the Thor graduates you get to see in this. And I love that when it's all said and done, Beryl pops up, because I was like, oh, I was like, huh, was Beryl always there? And then someone's like, Beryl, where the hell did you come from? And it's like, yeah, and she just randomly popped up. And it's just like, because I love that I think she's one of, like a story in the confines of new class 7 meeting people. That was the first Thor graduate I think they met. They might have met Edel first, I don't remember. They met Beryl first, but obviously like whoever you bring with you, because I brought Sarah my first time. Like I said, it's still my first, I haven't started my second playthrough yet. But obviously whatever character you bring, whether it's Fee, Sarah, or Elliot, will walk away, and then Beryl just like randomly present her. Like the moment she just rode up on them as a fortune teller, I was like, you see her from behind, I was like, is that Beryl? Is that Beryl? And I'm like, yeah, because I love that we still don't know what Beryl's thing is, because obviously it got brought up in 2. It's like, we know she's not a witch, but we don't know what her whole deal is. Like, you know, obviously she always knows more than she lets on, and obviously like her prophecies or her readings always end up kind of being true. Like they're a little vaguish, but when you're able to read through the line, you're like, okay, you see clear cut what things are. To me, one of the most interesting aspects is the fact is that you don't start this game off playing as Rean. Granted, considering his circumstances, it makes absolute sense, because I like that being part of the story too, that you have to build up to rescue him. Because it's like, well, why would you know where exactly he is? Because he's in the black workshop, and we cut back to that. But obviously he's been driven crazy by like his powers going up like completely berserk, and he's stuck in that state. And I thought it was so interesting, because I'm like, it makes sense, but it's so interesting because like every game you start off, well, technically you don't. Because I was about to say, like, the first thing you do in 3 is technically control new class 7. So it's actually reflective in that too, because I never even thought about doing that. Because the prologue is you attacking Juno Fortress, but you're obviously it doesn't include the whole back and forth situation between Team A and Team B. Like they don't do that whole thing. Obviously, they also make the point not to include the fact is that you're kicking it with Team A, Rean, and Class 7 are with are with Le Guin, whereas New Class 7 is with Angelica. Obviously, they hide that. Once again, very reflective of one, how they hide the fact is Milliam and Crow are with you. But it's so for you to be taking up Class 7 at the beginning of 4 is actually very reflective in that same regard. But it's still interesting that, you know, obviously that's a prologue, and even if you want to count the prologue, which technically this kind of does the same thing because you play a different group of characters at the beginning, you know, at the beginning of 4, because you're playing like Team Liberal and Team Crossbell kind of together, who they go up against like Maribel. Once again, that runs deeper because of the whole Crossbell thing, but obviously they run into Black Alberic and he reveals his combat shell and that whole situation. Regardless of all that, like I thought that was just kind of, you know, neat, kind of setting that up. So it's like I said, the parallels are there, but like the fact is that you don't have a ring for a good chunk of that, and I do think it's pretty dope that when you do fight with Rean again, it's in the Black Workshop when everyone's come to rescue him, and Celine's there to help him, but she's in her human form, which I thought was kind of dope. It makes sense because part of me had wondered, because we saw with Grianos that like Grianos could turn into a monster, because obviously in whatever shrine you go into, whatever the final shrine you go to get the Zemarian ore for Valamar's Tachi in 2, you have to fight VIDS, so Grianos turns into that monstrous form. So I was wondering, did Celine have another form like that? And it's like this human form. She never really went into like why that's a thing, but it's like she just doesn't like it. She hates being in that form. But like I like that she's there with Rean during the fight. She fights very much like Alphen in the sense that like she uses like a magic attack. Well, when you first have Alphen on your team, like she doesn't actually have a weapon. She even like obviously when you're going through that was it the Reverie at the very end of 2, that like in the epilogue. She has an orbital staff from the Epstein Foundation, if I remember correctly. It's where her orbital staff comes from. But it's very in a very similar sense of like Celine's main attack is like just throwing a fireball, but also her main thing is magical, also supporting Rean, who's completely out of control. Because I remember correctly, like you can't actually control Rean during that. He kind of does whatever he wants to. Technically, the only character you control during that is Celine, and I think it's interesting when you eventually get Duvally and Crow in that party too. I'm like, this is the craziest squad in the grand scheme of things. But I think it's so dope, that whole aspect of like, you know, it's about Yuna, Kurt, and Altina. Like for one, repairing this scattered. New Class 7, while also kicking Class 7's ass by being like, get your crap together. We all know who Rean is. We know that Instructor Rean is going to like blame himself because he always takes everything himself. So blaming himself for like, you know, the Great Twilight, we know that that's what he's going to do, because all of them are like, after losing Milliam and what happened with Rean, because I even thought it was interesting because they actually showed you what happened immediately after 3, Rean getting taken, all the other Divine Knights disappearing. And the fact of the matter is Emma using a spell to teleport everyone out of there. And so, you know, got to New Class 7. Muse backed away, so now we get filled in about her situation. And it's like, that was really interesting because like Eustace comes clean to about her whole situation, her being, you know, really a kind of like, we as the audience knew, but Rean had his suspicions. Obviously, she's hiding stuff. Ash kind of had some ideas too. But obviously, a lot of the group, Kurt and Yuna and Altina, they're the 3 people who were the most clueless about her situation. But it's like, Rean always picked up on she knows a lot more than she lets on in her whole playful attitude. So now it's about repairing Class 7 while also trying to find a way to find, you know, Rean. And obviously seeing what's going on in the Empire at the time. So I just thought that was kind of a dope start. I think it's because I love the context of finally understanding why Rean is stuck. I thought him being stuck looking the way he did with his white hair and red eyes, I thought that was a byproduct of him like becoming one with his power. And so I thought it was a positive reason why he was stuck like that. It's like, no, I think he was stuck. They end up talking about it like it's a byproduct of the curse. I think it was like the curse, and the fact is that he was activated in his power form that entire time. Like he was stuck like that for 2 weeks. So he's permanently stayed that way. Because that's actually what kind of confused me. Like his powers and the curse and him being a sacrifice are one and the same. That's where his ogre power comes from. which makes me wonder in the grand scheme of things, like, could he ever channel that anymore with everything that goes down? Like, you know, we'll get to it when we get there, but it's like, I'm wondering, could he ever use his ogre powers again? They're probably gone forever. Maybe not. Because it seems like, that's when, like, it's his ogre powers, like, one thing, and then the curse was on top of it. Because obviously, like, that's when his eyes went all reptile and they turn into, well, they turn, like, very cat-like or snake-like in the sense that they become, like, slits. Like, that's him, like, being completely submerged in the curse. Because it's not even, like, spirit unification anymore. It's, because in this game, it's not treated the same way his spirit unification was. It's no longer spirit unification, it's demon unchained. I mean, to be fair, like, it's the full-blown, like, power of a sacrifice. So that's why I'm like, I'm still a little confused on whether or not that's the same thing or not. I mean, because when he's stuck looking the way he is, I figured, I'm like, oh, he's technically always in his spirit unification form now, isn't he? Or is it just, that's why I'm curious, because like when he uses his S-craft, it says Ashen Crimson Leaves. So that's why I'm like, that's what, well, it was called Crimson, it was called Ashen Mortal Leaves in 3, the modification of his S-craft. So that's why it kind of confused me a little bit whether that's, so technically I guess he's always in his spirit unification form, but it's obviously the demon stuff is when he releases the sacrifice power. And I thought that was so interesting how they implemented that battle-wise, because now it's like when he uses it after 3 turns, not only he doesn't return to normal, he goes berserk, and so you lose control of him. You can't do any combat links with him. He will do whatever, he'll automatically attack no matter what. And like every turn that passes, he has a 30% chance of turning back to normal. And that doesn't immediately, like, because you know in this game, like when you want to flee, every time you want to try and flee, like if any failed attempts, your chances go up. So let's say that's like, oh, it's 60% now, you failed. Oh well, the next time you try is going to be 70. So I was wondering if it works like that, but I think every time he does it, you have basically a 3 out of 10 chance of him automatically coming out of it. But it's like a status element, so you have to use like, you know, basically a Curia Bomb, as well as like I definitely know. I definitely know Emma's, was it Serene Blessing, definitely heals it. I could be mistaken, I think Elliot's Holy Song does too, because I think it cures status elements as well. Definitely because Emma's Serene Blessing heals status elements, so that definitely works. But I think, if I'm such an idiot, I just played the game but I'm completely blanking. I think Elliot's Holy Song also does status elements as well. Regardless, it's just so interesting that they implemented it like that. I'm also going to talk about it. Go ahead and talk about this like right off the start, because you know, like I adore Rean. Rean's my favorite character in the series. Like I just like him as just a protagonist. That he is, you know, very like, once again, he is the core of Class 7, but also the fact is just a protagonist who's very like, doesn't have much faith in himself, who has a hard, like he's one of those protagonists who has a hard time relying on people, and people have to constantly remind him, stop doing stuff alone, stop carrying these burdens alone. That's how new Class 7 was able to kind of reach out to him. It's like, you don't have to carry this alone. And that being the thing for both, you know, that being an element that they had to talk to Muse and Ash about, you know. But really quickly, I love his second S-craft, dude. And of course, Breaking Dawn, because like if you remember correctly, like his technique in 2, his new S-craft is called, because I knew it was going to come about, because I was like, everyone's going to get their S-crafts over the course of the game. He's going to get his in like near the end, because that's what happens in every game. In the first game, his Flame Slash turned into the Azure Flame Slash, I think. Then near the end of 2, he gets his Termination Slash, and then near the end of 3, his 7 leaves turns into 7 shredded leaves or something like, you know. So I was waiting for it, and I love how they implement that technique. Basically, Rean has to face himself, and he basically has to use every technique. You know, he uses his Crimson Slash, his Crescent Slash, his Gale, and his Helix, and then afterwards he has an Epiphany, and he unlocks it. And it's like, it's such a dope technique. I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but to me, when I look at that, it looks like Rean's doing every technique he's ever done over the course of the 3 games. So basically, like at one point you see him slash past an enemy, and I'm like, because that was like 4 or 5 at that point, and I'm like, that looks just like his Crimson Leaf, his it looks like his autumn leaf cutter from 1 and 2. He also does a technique where he lifts his sword up and he slams it down. I'm like, that's his flame impact, his flame dragon impact. At one point he does like this when he goes like the 5 or 6, and it's his crimson slash. And at one point he slashed past an enemy and there's a green aura. So it's like, it's literally every technique Rean's ever done over the course of the games implemented in that. And I thought it looks so dope, and especially as just 1, 2, and counts it down and gets to the final part. 8 leaves, Breaking Dawn. And then, like, obviously, I like the Breaking Dawn version better than the Luminous Abyss, because the Luminous Abyss, you don't have, I think the blue aesthetic I like so much, but to be fair, in his, you know, transform state with his sacrifice powers, it makes sense why it looks the way it does. But it doesn't get as differentiated because everything has this crimson type of, you know, purple reddish flames to it. You know, that's all his techniques have that. So, and plus the environment's red and bloody, but still it looks dope and it's very scary and ominous looking. But it's like, I just like the way he starts to do flipping his blade and then sheathing it. I'm just like, that type of stuff. Like, once again, I'm nuts about swordsmen, so that's why Rean's also one of my favorites, because I love swords. Those are like my favorite weapons, but also like he's very like samurai-ish in the sense that like obviously his techniques involve, a lot of his techniques involve him sheathing his blade. Because also that was, interestingly enough, like why I also think is kind of interesting too. Like, I think that proves that he's kind of stuck in his state, because his advanced techniques, you know, his Gale finally becomes his arcane Gale, because that's been the thing since 2. Every time his Gale transforms, so that when he uses it in his transformed state, he can strike twice. Which I never realized until this one. He ends it with a crimson slash, because basically once he sheaths his sword, he releases a flame. Because in 2 it's just more of a wave. Looking back in 3, it probably now looking at it in 4 and probably looking back in retrospect of 3, it is just a crimson slash he ends it off on. Once again, it's such a dope thing, and just like that moment too, I love it, because it's like oh, because I already knew what was going to happen in 4, just because I saw something that said Rean, like I talked about it before. Like, there was a picture I saw, I was googling something related to Trails, and it showed a picture and it was saying like Trails of Cold Steel 4, the moment Rean becomes a divine blade. But in this particular picture, it showed Rean with black hair and his jacket from 3. So part of me was thinking like either that was something they took from 3 and just, it was, you know, because sometimes you'll Google something and it'll have something unrelated, related but unrelated, but also like it'll be titled something related to it. So it's like it was related to Trails 4, but like obviously Rean doesn't look like that the entire 99% of Trails of Cold Steel 4. So that's what I was wondering about. And obviously, but let's not forget there's also a way, because there's one of Elise's bonding events leads you to being able to get his jacket repaired so he can wear it again. And also once you get that, well, yeah, you automatically unlock for costumes Rean's natural hair, his black hair. What I also thought was dope, like when you go back to where the mirroring pool, or whatever that pool is called, that shows you the truth about everything. If you go back there, Rean picks up a hair for his costumes, and it's basically, he gets hair that's like brown with a little streak of white, very like I think it's called the Blood and Iron or something like that. But basically, it just make him look more like his dad, you know, aesthetically. So I thought that was just so interesting. But still, the moment he becomes a divine blade, him going up against Cassie, the moment Cassius pops up, I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be it. This is gonna be so dope. And I was so excited to get to that moment, and then like have everyone walking around, and they threw it out there. It's like, so what do we call him now? Like, Divine Blade is a lot better than Ashen Chevalier. And they're like, how about we call him the Divine Blade of Light? And I was like, that's my thought. I hadn't read anything, but the way his master was talking about it in 3, and like, you know, him being the light, and I was like, you're gonna be like, you have to be like the Divine Blade of light, because Arios is like the Divine Blade of Wind. I don't think Cassius has a subtitle in that same regard. He's just a divine. Same thing. Well, because his master is just known. Their master is just known as the hermit. You know, swordsman. I think so. I think but he's not the divine blade or something. But then like I was like, oh yeah, divine. And then they were like, well, it's all about, the final form is all about void. So maybe Rean's, the divine blade of zero, as in, zero being nothing. And it's like all that, I was like, that'd be pretty dope. They never settled on one, but his third characteristic in his on his character page is just divine blade. So I'm curious what his subtitle will be, or will they be, because it doesn't come up too much, but it's still just kind of like, after you become a divine blade and a lot of breaking down, it's just like, he finally reached, he's at that level, and it's so dope. I'm so bummed you don't actually get to meet his master. That might be a thing, like, because obviously his character design is there, so he must pop up in one of the other games or something. Like maybe Arios runs into him, or maybe Cassius, because those obviously being his two other disciples, but Rean being his final disciple. And eventually there's a whole thing of like Rean might make a disciple of his own, have one disciple of his own one day, because what they do, interestingly enough, in this, because obviously every game has their books. One of the books in this is 3 and 9, and I was reading a guide, looking up, stuff, and it said that those books play a role in future Trails games. So like, I guess, because this is what I assume too. Like the next Trails game, I'd assume, I haven't read anything at this point in time, but I'd assume the next Trails game will take place in Calvert. Just because, like, well, you had 3 in Libero, 2 in Crossbell, 4 in Erebonia. Calvert's the one place we haven't really tackled yet, so I'm assuming 3 and 9 are going to be main characters. I don't know if they're going to be the main characters, but maybe they're going to be main characters about that. Because obviously there's still the whole thing about the organization. Because part of me was wondering, like, the organization that 3 and 9 were a part of, I was like, is that the same organization? Is that supposed to be Ouroboros? But it's like, no, it's a different organization. At least I believe it is. I mean, to be fair, those books always do play a role in the story somehow. Because obviously, like, their Carnelia books were about Toby. Obviously, Mick kind of lied about them and fabricated a lot of stuff, but they're that. There's also the Roselia books, the Red Moon Rose books. Obviously, you finally meet Roselia. You actually get to see her, like, full, like, character model. Seeing her as an adult, it's weird. I should also know, think about her as an adult in her adult form. Makes me think of that side quest in Michelin, where basically it's a drinking contest. And I love that basically the 3 at the end of it was it Aurelia, Adele, I always, like I said, I say her name weird every time. I think it's Edel. I'm blanking on who the third one was. It was Sharon, right? Those are the 3 winners, because, like, Shara was already pretty plastered, and Sarah just couldn't keep up. So I just love that being a quest, because that didn't include, I think, it wasn't Lucy that was it Lucy, or I'm confused. Yeah, it was Lucy that took part in it as well. Someone else I'm blanking on. Oh, it's someone from the Crossbell side of things. I forgot who it was though. Oh, it was Cecile from the hospital. So regardless, I went on a whole bunch of tangents there. I do apologize. This video is going on, quite a bit of time. Obviously, probably edit this a little bit, but regardless, I'm going to end this portion of the discussion here. I'll continue this discussion in the next part, whenever it is I record that, whether it's still today or tomorrow or when. So like I said, it's probably going to be a while before you actually see these videos go up, but regardless. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.